Hello and welcome to the Kamla Show, where we bring you interviews and conversations with technologists, entrepreneurs, filmmakers, and other news from in and around the San Francisco Bay Area. My guest today is Dr. Ashish Gupta. He's an engineer, entrepreneur, and a venture capitalist. He's on the boards of quite a few startups, both here in the US and in India. He divides his time between Bangalore, India, and Silicon Valley. Ashish got his PhD in computer science from Stanford University and his undergrad from IIT Kanpur. And he's also an author. His book was published by MIT Press. That's all I know. What was the book about?
It was about databases.
Databases.
Yeah.
That's what you majored in.
Yes.
Databases. So let me just read out. Give us a sense of what is happening in India. It is booming.
Yep.
The startup scene in India is booming. And the Financial Times had an article, James Crabtree, he wrote an article saying Bangalore has stepped out of its back office space. And Koramangala, an area that you know in Bangalore, is a hub of startup activities. Flipkart, one of the unicorns, the famous unicorns companies.
With 15 horns now.
Unicorns are companies valued at over $1 billion. Tell us what is happening in Bangalore.
Yeah, and that was, I was telling, they have 15, now they're valued at 15 billion. So you can either count it as one large horn or, but nevertheless. So what is happening in Bangalore? I think a confluence of a few different dynamics. One is that I don't think Steve Jobs imagined that the smartphone would unleash something as powerful as what is happening in India right now, which is the access of both compute and connectivity to people who otherwise would not have ever bought a PC. So that number is just taking off like a rocket ship.
So the legacy of PC is not there in India?
It is in much smaller measure, absolutely. And the growth rate of mobile phones is of the order of over 100 million per year was last year. And that number is projected to be 150 million smartphones this year.
So in a population of 1.2 billion, how many have cell phones today?
So the estimate of cell phones, not necessarily smartphones, is somewhere between 700 to 800 million. And smartphones are supposed to be of the order of 150 odd million. And that number has pretty much happened over the last 2-3 years. And the replacement cycle for phones in India is supposed to be between 6 to 9 months. So of the new phones that come in, several go to replace, but several also go in for new phones. So one phenomenon that is happening is really for the average person to get access to connectivity and compute, which is the cell phone revolution. The other thing that is happening, ironically, is because the infrastructure in India has historically been poor, you are being able to leapfrog the traditional infrastructural issues through newer models.
Like?
For example, let us say there is not a good road that gets to a particular town. It becomes hard to open a big box retail store because that requires trucks, that requires bringing pallets in and so on and so forth. It is much easier to drop ship parcels because only X number of parcels need to be brought in. So ironically, not having good enough roads in a certain place lends itself to servicing by e-commerce faster than it lends itself to being serviced by big box retail.
But may I bring up a point? You say infrastructure, poor infrastructure aids e-commerce, but poor infrastructure also impedes e-commerce because logistics and transportation, the last mile problem is still a huge problem in India.
And there, you're absolutely right. It cuts both ways. Net, right now, it is helping e-commerce because you have a human being who has the desire to access certain products. The other alternatives are not there. Therefore, they will go on to e-commerce.
That's why investment is an art.
So and you can manage it in many interesting manners. You can tell somebody who is connected more poorly that we will get you your box in 6 days. You can tell somebody who's connected more effectively, we will get you your box in 1 day. And because it is electronic, you can set expectations based upon where the customer is coming from. And you have happy customers in both cases. And those are the kinds of innovations. I'll give you another example to the point that you make, which is, by the way, a very, very good point. Let's take being able to accept payments. Because there is not enough penetration of credit cards, in India, more than half the commerce ends up getting done using cash on delivery, which you are familiar with, but a lot of people in the US would find strange. Somebody shows up with a box, and only when the box is accepted is the payment made. This is a completely different method of payment than what is seen in the US. And it has very interesting side effects. Fraud becomes lower. If you're going to pay by cash, you couldn't be conducting online fraud because you are going to pay by cash.
But there could be fraud of a different nature. That is, the person could, order and not pay.
And not pay.
Yeah.
So it converts from fraud to a different kind of conversion problem.
Yeah.
And there the companies therefore work their way around it by making sure that they blacklist and whitelist people. If somebody has a habit of returning packages, then they will call up the person 3 times before sending them their package or SMS them. So then the companies start innovating in very many different ways, which then leads to building businesses in India differently than businesses here, even though in principle they might be similar businesses. So the second thing in the list of, you were asking what is happening in India, one is clearly people are getting connected. 2 is they are finding that they can fulfill their aspirations in ways that could not have been fulfilled before. And the third thing that is happening is the younger generation is taking employment for granted and therefore are willing to take risk. And no offense meant to you and I, when we were growing up, if we got a job, we were very happy. We grew up thinking that even jobs are hard to come by. The younger generation has no such compunctions. They believe jobs are their birthright, and therefore they come out saying, what more can I do?
So there's a behavior, attitude
change.
There
is an attitude change. They're both willing to therefore spend their money more liberally, and they're willing to take more risk. And you will see most of these companies are being created by 20-somethings. And that is the other phenomenon happening in India.
So I know I jokingly said, that it's an art investment.
Yeah.
How much of it is an art and how much of it is science in India? And you've been there for nearly 10 years. I met you about 9 years ago when you just set up Helion. So I'm wondering how much of it is an art, like what you described just now. 9 years ago, if an entrepreneur had come and told you this is what would happen, I don't know if you would have believed him, because you're going from Silicon Valley, where you're used to FedEx coming at a certain time, tracking and everything. Would you have believed that entrepreneur then? What is the change that has happened in you, and how much of it is your database-driven research helping or informing your decision-making? Because you are a database guy.
So assume that the database-driven research is not
you
helping informing.
Assume.
So would I have believed somebody? So I have learned even before I went to India, by virtue of being an investor since about 99, which was when I first started investing in India and here. Daksh.
Which was your brother-in-law was.
Indeed, the CEO. That grew up to be a 20,000 person organization. So very quickly I learned that actually the person who's the smartest person in the room is really the entrepreneur. Because if that is not the smartest person, then you've made a mistake, because the money should be with the smartest person for the problem at hand. So I have learned over time, or my belief is that you really figure out whether the person that is going to run the business is somebody that you trust with the particular task at hand. And they need not be the best person for some other business, but for their business they really are the best, which is why if you don't have that belief, then you're going to be second guessing them. And the investor cannot know more than the entrepreneur, because the entrepreneur is spending 24/7, whereas the investor is coming in and out in a general sense. There will be some areas where pattern matching would tell you that yes, I have seen that this kind of behavior leads to bad sales. You can share that with an entrepreneur, but net, the entrepreneur knows more. So when we started out 10 years ago, we actually backed a mobile commerce company.
Which was?
Called NG Pay. Because we were of the view that this whole thing is going to turn quickly. And we backed Make My Trip.
I remember talking to NG Pay. What happened to him?
NG Pay finally got acquired by Flipkart after struggling for many years, because the data revolution just kept taking 1 year longer than we had thought, until it finally got to a point where we did not continue to invest as much as we should have. Make My Trip, on the other hand, turned out to be a roaring success.
A gold mine.
Absolutely, because some behavior changes happened earlier than others. Some of the infrastructure related problems took longer to solve, and therefore e-commerce happened later, whereas travel, which was printed tickets and you did not need to move physical goods, happened faster.
You invested in Redbus too?
We invested in Redbus too, which again did not need printed tickets, and we did extremely well there.
So you're doing a lot of pattern matching in your investment strategy.
Indeed.
Because e-commerce is one space where you have invested quite a lot. And just this year, I mean, I have a list, a printout of, so you have Rail Yatri raised money, My Smart Price, 10 million, Helion and Axel. Axtria, big data analytics, 30 million. ZapStitch, 2 million. Topper, 10 million. Simple Learning, 15 million. I mean, I have more. The list goes on and on. But quite a lot of them are in the e-commerce space. What is your attraction to e-commerce? And even among them, there are verticals like garments, toys, and you know they have like 6 or 7 verticals or subcategories.
So we are big believers in the fact that the consumer in India is going to continue to want more and more, because the consumer is coming from a place where they don't have enough.
The purchasing power is not as high as China.
It absolutely is not as high as China.
So then,
but compared to what they have, so for example, the average number of shoes that an Indian has is less than 1. An average number of shoes that an American has is greater than 4.5. Now, it is unlikely that the regular Indian would not want one more shoe. It is not as good as China, where I don't know what the average number of shoes is, but it is a metaphor for the fact that people want to increase and improve their standard of living. In large measure, by the way, driven by media. You look at all the sitcoms and the movies in India, they are no longer about middle class people. They are about wealthy people. Shah Rukh Khan drives a Ferrari in Switzerland in every movie that you see. I haven't seen anybody on a Vespa scooter in an Indian movie forever now.
No, Shah Rukh Khan did in some movie. He drove a Vespa scooter.
Probably pretending to be. And so you get my drift though.
I'm going to have a counterpoint.
We should. So the media is very much a driver of aspiration to say that you deserve more. And most people in India would like to get more and more and more. Might not be as much as in China vis-a-vis ability, but the desire is very much there. And the starting point is low enough that there is a lot of headroom in what they can purchase. That is one. Second is the logistics of actually going out and purchasing physically are extremely poor. Choice is poor and traffic is ugly. And a lot of the people that you're selling to, if they are in a small city, they don't have choice because there are only 3 shirts available. If they're in a big city, they have to drive an hour and a half. So the desire is there and the inability to fulfill that desire is there. And that takes us to therefore investing in ways to fulfill that desire. And e-commerce turns out to be a good example. We are going after verticals where we can build defensible businesses, defensible against the horizontal juggernauts of Amazon and or a Flipkart. So these are businesses that either require deep expertise and or they have such high margin that you can continue to lose more money and still not get wiped out. And that is the approach that we've taken. And that is the furniture, own brand of clothes, the kinds of businesses that you were talking about, for example, grocery retail, which is very specialized when you start doing fresh, and that's the kind of approach that we've taken. But to your counterpoint.
Were you in the debating team in your school? So, what has been your exit strategy? You said the juggernauts of Flipkart, but you have sold so many of your companies. I'm being deliberately over the top when I say over the, but you have sold, I think, more than at least 2 companies to Flipkart. And Flipkart is a unicorn valued at $15 billion, which earlier this week, I believe, got $700 million. It's racing to corner a piece of the market, Indian market.
Right.
Why are you selling companies?
So the 2 companies that we sold to Flipkart, what was clear to us that we are financially better off, and that includes the entrepreneur and the investor, by selling to a company that is, so by the way, we also sold Taxi for Sure to
I was
Ola
going to come, that's my next one.
So I will add that into the mix.
No, let's just
okay, we'll keep
with
it separately. So with these companies, financing becomes a very large driver of success. If one is going to spend money in acquiring market share, like you mentioned, they raised $700 billion on the back of 700 million, sorry. What did I say?
Billion.
Okay, sorry, not yet. Okay. So, then they will start a small country or a large country. So
they can start Koramangala as well.
Absolutely. So, whoever gets the ability to start raising large amounts of money, and that starts becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because the next investor who comes and says, my risk is lowest when I already go back the largest guy or gal, And the person who's not the largest, therefore, gets into a vicious cycle, where the person who's larger gets into a positive feedback loop. So we have sold these companies largely because it was clear to us that from a financing strategy perspective, entrepreneurs were good, execution was good, market opportunity was there. They were all driven by financing strategy.
So you're very scientific when it comes to exiting, but little bit on the artistic side when you're investing.
Because, even the exit part is not that scientific. The thought process might be well thought through, but it could still be wrong. So on the investment side also, the art part, most of these are bets. So let's take a look at the contrast between NGPay and Make My Trip. NGPay as a standalone company today would be the darling of mobile commerce. I mean, it's got both the buzzwords, commerce and mobile. What more do you want?
It's a payment.
And a payment solution with all three buzzwords. But timing didn't work out the way we had thought. So it is very much an art. In the 2003 timeframe, I interviewed 7 of the leading investors in the Valley. They were considered the the hallmarks of
the
good.
pantheon.
Absolutely. And
we love the word pantheon. In the temple of investment.
And that is why you do what you do, and I struggle for words.
No.
And so and we were talking to them, and these were people who've built really venerated firms like Venrock and Sutter Hill and Moore David Dow and stuff like that. And we got completely disparate answers on what do they look for in entrepreneurs. Just a simple question.
So you were doing your database
We were
stuff.
doing the data gathering part.
That's what
Absolutely.
I mean. So you wanted to, so you could know primary key, secondary
and completely
key.
failed.
No.
Because there were some people who told us they never invest in repeat entrepreneurs. Because repeat entrepreneurs get limited by what they have learnt. Therefore, they only invest in new entrepreneurs because they are unlimited, because of what one can call naivete or what one can call unbridled ambition. And so if, for example, you consider a business like Uber, if somebody was experienced and said, no, the law will do this, that and the other, they wouldn't build an Uber. On the other hand, they continue to fight the legal battle and yet get valued at whatever they valued. So even something as basic as, should you back somebody who's proven or not, completely disparate answers. What do you look for in an entrepreneur? Somebody would say emotional energy, somebody else would say leadership skills, but then you say, what is leadership skills? And it was an answer, I know it when I see it, much like what is referred to some other things also, which we will not speak about. And the art analogy, therefore, just carries through in a whole bunch of stuff, looking at spaces. Who thinks what space is going to become interesting when? So if you consider a business like...
But investors can create a space. They can create categories, and that's something that they do. We have created a market category. That's something investors love. And so through your artistic ability, you can create, because a lot of the valuation and everything, sometimes there are no numbers, right?
Absolutely.
You don't know what the market share is. So when you're creating that slide deck to present to, it is also how good that entrepreneur is in convincing you of the potential.
Me. Absolutely. And by the way, also so that we just put it on the table, the role that luck plays, which none of us like to talk about because it makes us look incompetent, the role that luck plays, however, is beyond belief.
Really?
Absolutely. So I will stay away from specific examples because I will end up...
Define luck. Is it when preparation meets, when opportunity meets preparation? That's one definition of luck.
So I'm not including that because I would say
this is just random.
This is random stuff. So take for granted that we have to do our best, we have to be aggressive, we have to go out and... One can't sit back. That is not luck. That is also potentially luck, but that is dumb luck.
Okay.
Let's just
you have to stay engaged.
You absolutely have to keep taking shots at whatever it is you're doing. At the same time, one cannot discount just the role of being at the right place at the right time.
Give me an example.
Okay. A company shall go unnamed, but a similar company that would get an acquisition offer for, let's say, February of 2000 versus April of 2000, which is just 2 months. What changed in the middle was the sentiment of the market associated with the market downturn in March of 2000. Now, not much has changed vis-a-vis the competence of either of the two folks.
It's just the sentiment wrapper.
It's just the sentiment that changed. over which you really have no control. You can do whatever you want, but if a discussion started in February, which was meant to consummate in April of 2000, that discussion might not consummate. Somebody happens to take a vacation, and during that time period is when that correction happens. And I'm just talking
Yes.
about a market event as luck.
Right.
There are other things that happen as luck. Consider companies that get acquired. Anybody who's making an acquisition frequently ends up acquiring companies that are somewhat known to them. And I call this out because Indian companies actually are at a disadvantage because of this. So let's consider a company in the Bay Area that is looking to acquire a company.
So Facebook acquired, what is it, Little Lab or something?
Little Eye
familiar?
Labs.
Yeah.
Now, that is a very interesting example of how you then start working around certain elements.
Was that an acqui hire?
It was acquisition for the technology.
Yeah.
So it was not an acqui-hire. The technology was actually valued fairly seriously for the stage at which they were. And the luck involved in the person who was making that acquisition could have heard of 3 companies, and they could have been at a cocktail party for one of the CEOs to have met them and just hit it off from a chemistry perspective. Now, even when the other entrepreneur who turned up at the same party might not share the same chemistry, because we each resonate with a different kind of person, there is no correlation to the product competence. There is not even a correlation to the effort made by the 2 people.
It is
entirely to do with chemistry. And at the end of the day, people do business with other people. Now, how do you work around? Now you can say you must hire only likable CEOs, but likable CEOs might not be the most competent CEOs for what you're building. So I will also put on the table that one needs to do one's best, but getting too cocky around believing that it is all about our competence can land us in a hot soup. Can we do something about it? Not. But at the same time, let us not go grab credit for things that ended up happening largely out of chance. But then coming back to your art piece,
no wonder you did a PhD. You like to defend your thesis.
So I'm a big believer in Blind Man and the Elephant. Do you remember that story from your childhood?
Yes.
And when we look at the same elephant, we all see different body parts.
Akira Kurosawa's film also.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Actually, you're right. That is even a more beautiful. So I will steal that for my future conversations. We all see different things, and that's not because we are not competent or so and so forth, but we bring different perspectives by definition. The same company, where seen by 2 different people, speaks differently to those 2 investors. And one investor could see the potential, whereas the other investor could not, just because of where they have come from. And I put that in the art category, because you just cannot teach everybody all the tricks.
Do you subscribe to that?
Oh, enormously.
So you subscribe to the personal chemistry bit?
Big time.
So what is your smell test for investing in a company? That is the textbook cases.
Sure.
You know, they have a great plan, you know, the elevator pitch is good, everything.
So I'll tell you mine. And by the way, one other thing, it is not necessary to do every good deal, which is why this business can continue to work as an art form. You don't have to paint every beautiful painting. You don't have to do every good interview. As long as you do enough, you've done a good enough job. And investment is exactly the same. I don't have to figure out how to do every good deal. I just have to figure out that the deals that I do are good. So we can therefore each have a different model and still be good at what you do. Not to glorify any of the investors, but the style of Picasso versus the style of a Rembrandt is completely different. Just speak to different people. So what do I look for from a smell test perspective? One is that it should be a space where mistakes can be made. Why? Because whatever is the idea at the table is going to change. Is there room to change?
You want the headroom.
I want the headroom to be able to make mistakes, not just the headroom to grow.
You're not a risk taker because you want some safety.
No, the ability to make mistakes is what I'm saying. So I'm assuming that we are going to make mistakes.
Sometimes you may not have headroom and yet succeed.
Oh, absolutely. It doesn't appeal to me.
Okay.
So the headroom for growth should be there, but the headroom to make mistakes should be there. That gives the entrepreneur the ability to try things out and not be stuck if they don't get it right to begin with, because very few people get things right the first time. That requires even more luck, and I want to reduce the amount of luck involved in the whole process. So that is one. As far as the entrepreneurs themselves are concerned, there are 3-4 things that at least I look for. Among the top of the list is intellectual honesty. If one is not intellectually...
Is that integrity?
No, I mean intellectual honesty. You can have people who are actually dishonest from a financial perspective, but who are intellectually honest vis-a-vis realizing the what the market tells them, what other people tell them, and so on and so forth. Now, if it is integrity, I'm not willing to invest behind somebody, because at the end of the day, like I said, all the reins are in the hands of the entrepreneur.
Right.
So I have to trust them with everything, including my investors' money. So please take that for granted. But intellectual honesty is slightly larger than just honesty. You could have a financially honest person who's completely delusional about what other people are telling them. So you should be able to tell me that my shirt is not pretty and I should not get defensive about it, because you are the customer at the end of the day. So one is intellectual honesty. The other is the ability to be schizophrenic. Entrepreneurship is very much about thinking big but executing small. Trusting oneself but yet be willing to replace oneself. Believe in the business that you are doing, yet be willing to change that business. So it's a series of contradiction in terms that one has to balance all the time. So this is a person who should be able to carry conflicting thoughts in their head and yet not get stilted in execution.
Do you carry those conflicting thoughts?
More often than my wife would like. So
okay, I interrupted
the
you.
answer is absolutely yes.
Okay, so
which might not make me a good entrepreneur, but yes.
Okay, and what else?
These are two. The third one is emotional energy. The entrepreneur is a cheerleader. Whether things are going well or things are going, if they sit down and say, oh my God, we are in trouble, they will lose everybody else. They have to be intellectually honest to recognize that there is trouble, yet keep their emotional energy saying, we will get this. Not because they're fooling others, but because they believe in that much. So there needs to be emotional energy around the last. And last but not least is curiosity, which is a very human trait. If an entrepreneur is not curious, they will stop learning. And at the end of the day, you and I will survive only if we continue to learn. And an entrepreneur is carrying even larger weights. Actually, you are an entrepreneur, so why am I saying? So yes.
No, it's not. I understand, because curiosity will lead to answers when you least expect
When you least expect them,
yes.
Absolutely. And then one keeps learning random things and they piece it together in their head.
Okay.
So those are some of the things that
I have 1 minute left.
Yeah.
Have you ever flirted with the idea of becoming an entrepreneur again?
I am an entrepreneur right now. I am running a venture capital firm, which is as much a startup.
It's a safe.
No. It is not safe at all. In fact, it is a much riskier business on the following. My employability coefficient keeps reducing every day, because what are the skills that I learn? I learn bullshitting. Whereas at least as an entrepreneur, I will learn either biz dev or sales or...
I didn't say it, you said it, Ashish. We had so many other questions. I had so many questions, but we ran out of time because you spoke about it. Thank you so much for stopping by. And thank you for watching. We'll be back again next week with another episode. If you missed any of our shows, you can watch them on our YouTube channel. And I'm on Twitter. My handle is @Kamla. Send me a tweet if you like what you see. And thank you for watching again.